Hi all, I just want to do a little quick video here about how many teeth there are in the mouth of a horse. And you might be wondering why I put this on the module to begin with, but I think it'll become clear once I explain what's going on. And thank you for those of you who hazarded a guess as to what was going on here. The reason I put this on was that I think we need to get in our minds the very different way that people thought about the nature of knowledge in other times and in other places, in this case in ancient Greece. The example is not from ancient Greece, it's from the Christian Middle Ages, as it says in the excerpt in the year of our Lord 1432, so that's really towards the end of the Middle Ages, but they were still working with a kind of Aristotelian frame for the universe. Okay, so let's take a quick look at it and see what's going on here. There arose a grievous quarrel among the brethren. Gee, I really should proofread these things, brother. Over the number of teeth in the mouth of a horse. For 13 days the disputation raged without ceasing. All the ancient books and chronicles were fetched out. Wonderful and ponderous erudition, such as was never before heard of in this region, was made manifest. Okay, so it seems like a very strange way to approach a question of how many teeth there are in the mouth of a horse, unless you understand what Aristotle considered knowledge and how he differentiated that from, let's say, opinion or belief or guesses or something like that. I mean, if we think about those different kinds of categories, we still have those, right? I mean, you can have an opinion about something, I can have an opinion about something, and it can have really no basis to it whatsoever. And so really this question is about what kind of basis can assure us that we actually have knowledge and not something else. And so the young friar comes along, youthful friar of goodly bearing, asked his learned superiors for permission to add a word, and straightway to the wonderment of the disputants, whose deep wisdom he sore vexed, he beseeched them to unbend in a manner coarse and unheard of, and to look in the open mouth of a horse and find answers to their questionings. What's wrong with that? I mean, that seems like a perfectly reasonable way to do this, doesn't it? Well, except that, what happens when you look in the mouth of the second horse and it's not the same as the first horse? What happens when you look in lots and lots of horses' mouths and there's no single answer that you can come to? In other words, that there's a number of different kinds of answers. Well, you're faced with a problem then. What you don't have yet is knowledge, right? Certainly not by an Aristotelian standard, and probably not by a modern standard as well. Just looking and leaving it at that is not necessarily going to tell you what the right answer is as opposed to what the most common answer is. And so the person who says, let's just look, is not taking into account all of the rest of those, possible other kinds of answers. I mean, how do you know that the first horse whose mouth you look in actually has the right number, whatever the right number actually is supposed to mean? But here's the even more significant problem. So for Aristotle, you don't have knowledge unless you can essentially deduce it from a kind of starting point, a set of assumptions that are completely reliable and that you know are reliable, okay? And so you can't do that by looking at the world, the material world. Why not? Well, because it's material, okay? So knowledge is the domain of the rational, of the mind, okay? The material world is not the domain of the mind. It's a different domain. Now, we get that codified in the modern era through Descartes, who's going to tell us that I think, therefore I am, and so he comes up with what we now know as Cartesian dualism. But there was a form of dualism all along in the Greek world and in the Latin world. For Aristotle, what it was what's called hylomorphism. And so hylomorphism is the idea that everything is made up of two parts, hyla and morph. Okay, so morph, you probably know that word as, somebody morphs into something else. Well, they change their form, right? So that's what morph refers to, form. So that's the idea world. Hyla is matter. Okay, so everything that exists is the combination of form and matter for Aristotle. And so what you have to do is to figure out what category something belongs in, and therefore what the necessary conditions are for that thing to be in that category. So this is how Aristotle sets out to define things. He defines things through what we call genus and differentia definitions. So the genus is the group into which something belongs. The differentia is what makes it different from everything else in that group. So a human being is a rational animal. Okay, so what category are we in? We're in the animal category. And what makes us different from all the other animals? We are rational. None of the others are rational. Okay, and so you can do that with everything as far as Aristotle is concerned. You can put it in a category, and you can figure out what makes it different from other things. And once you have that, then you can start knowing or understanding what is necessary for that thing to be what it is. And so now we're talking about things that are necessary for it. Now let's go back to teeth, okay? And let's go back to horses. We could define a horse. I'm actually not sure how Aristotle would define a horse in those terms. I mean, in modern sense, we would probably define it genetically or something like that. We have a number of ways of defining it. And of course, there are always fuzzy edges to these things. So we have to deal with the phenomena of mules, which are hybrid animals between donkeys and horses. We have to deal with the offspring of horses and zebras, and so all sorts of stuff like that. So there are always fuzzy edges, right? And that might affect how many teeth there are in the mouth of whatever progeny a horse has with whatever else. But the reason that all of the brethren, the monks, were arguing about this is that they could not deduce a necessary answer to the question, how many teeth must a horse have, from the category in which the horse existed, right? There was nothing in that definition that told us anything about the number of teeth that the horse must have. And so by the end of this little excerpt that I showed you here, they are saying it's a mystery. We write it down that way, and we just leave it in the hands of God, because only God must know those sorts of things, because clearly we don't and we can't know those things. The youthful friar does not fare so well. They throw him out. Why? Because he is introducing the idea that knowledge can just be incremental or observational, or not about what is certain, okay? And that is anathema. That is a heresy from an Aristotelian point of view. And that represents one of the sea changes that we have when we move to the modern era, when we start thinking about knowledge as, in fact, being accessible through, very careful observation and testing of those observations and all of those sorts of things that we find in, the scientific method. So this really represents a kind of watershed moment, and I don't actually know if this event actually happened. It's probably apocryphal, but it just really nails nicely the difference between how people thought about knowledge, in ancient and medieval times, and how we now think about knowledge. And for the purposes of our course, a course on knowledge, responsibility, and society, it's going to make a difference as to how we think about knowledge. Is it only going to count if we know something for certain? If we have knowledge in this Aristotelian sense of knowledge, that to know something means to be able to deduce it from its from the assumptions that give it its own definition. And so that's what I hope you can see in this, and it's a fun little example, but I'm hoping you also think about how our notion of knowledge is going to change as we read some of the rest of the texts that we have before us coming up. It's in some ways an awfully comfortable world if you can just have an Aristotelian version of knowledge. You can say, yeah, we know, or no, we don't know, and that's the end of it. And if we don't know, then something else has to govern how we behave and what we do in the world. But it's not going to be knowledge that we can share with others and all of that sort of thing. So that's that's all this example is about. So anyway, it's probably going to come up later in the course as well. So just wanted to give you a little idea of what's going on there. Thanks.